All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Data-Driven Diet webinar. In this discussion, I have a panel of brilliant experts in their field of nutrition and diet. So this hour coming up, we're going to be talking about and untangling all the nutritional questions that are in our lives, if maybe not all of them, but at least quite a few, to begin to understand how you can start to quantify what dietary choices work for you, and if they work for you, for how long, when is the time to pivot, and really to untangle your nutritional choices for life. This is a topic that's quite close to my heart because 10 years ago, if I could tell you that I was yo-yo dieting every month, I would probably say that is correct because I was up and down. I was eating 5 times a day, every 3 hours, wanting to lose weight, only to realize that I was in a chronic high blood sugar state. And with insulin in my bloodstream, weight loss was the last thing my body was going to do. So I wanted to address the elephant in the room, which is diet. No matter what room we're in, what conversation we're having, diet comes up and nutrition comes up, and so often we are not sure whether what we're doing is the right thing for us. So it's easy to make the wrong choices. And unfortunately, we live in a world where it's almost encouraged, or at least it's really easy to make the less optimal dietary choices when we go into a grocery store. So I have 3 individuals here, and I would like to pick their brain. And as I do a short introduction for each of them, please, if you're attending, let us know where you're coming in from. Which city are you in? Which state are you in? Are you in the US? Are you out of the US? So just let us know where you're coming in from. And in the meantime, let me go around and start with Carly Hayes. Carly is a registered dietitian. She has a passion for really helping people live their healthiest lives. In her career, in working with veterans and working in the outpatient setting of counseling, she has realized that a lot of her patients, over 80% of them, were dealing with conditions that could have been prevented, but if they were just following nutritional guidelines and nutritional choices that were optimal for them. So now she works with NutriSense, which is a continuous glucose monitor company where you can have the tools to monitor your blood sugar continuously for at least 2 weeks at a time, and really start to untangle how certain foods impact your blood sugar. Okay, so we've got people from Philly area, Albany, New York, sunny San Diego. Oh yeah, and I'm coming in from Los Angeles, which is also 75 and sunny as usual. Loving it. All right, so up to Ashley. Ashley Grimmell. She's a functional nutritionist and biometric coach. She's an absolute rock star because I've seen her do obstacle courses like no one's business. And it is something that I adore. And it's amazing to see how a woman, and she's super lean and just crazy, running through all these obstacles that I get tired just by looking at them. Anyways, so she has an extensive experience, interestingly, in oncology. She's worked 11 years with patients who have suffered from cancer, and also 7 years with patients in infectious diseases. So firsthand, she's seen how detrimental our system is and how much of her patients could have lived a healthy life if they had done if they had made the right choices with their diet and nutrition. So there's a really interesting interlink between Ashley's and Carly's career, that a lot of their patients that they've worked with, they were working with them when it was too late. They were already unhealthy. So it's really nice to see now that they're really working on preventing all these health conditions that a lot of the Americans are dealing with. I mean, if you look at the latest statistics, only 1 in 8 American adults are metabolically healthy. That's 12%. That's an absolutely low number, and we really need to change that. And changing that, we have somebody who is also on a course of helping people making the right choices in health and nutrition. We've got Sean Wells. He is he's a world famous nutrition. Oh my God, I am messing up your bio. I can't believe I just did that.
Good. That's fine.
And I know Sean so well. World's leading nutritional biochemist. It is a title that's a mouthful, but you really make that true because you have patented 20 novel ingredients, formulated over 700 supplements, foods and beverages, cosmeceuticals. So you have a name in this industry. And it's not only because you've helped people overcome various health challenges, but you have overcome many of your own. So your story inspires thousands of people to really take their health into their own hands and believe that it's possible. You just have to really apply that N=1 approach. So welcome, and thank you so much, all three of you, for joining in. And thank you, attendees who are coming in from various parts of the country: Medina, Ohio, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Fantastic. Okay, so the way it's going to go, we're going to run through a few different questions across the board. And if you attendees have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or at the Q&A box at the bottom, and we will address those questions at the end of the webinar. So we're going to run for about 45 minutes, and then the last 15 minutes, we'll leave it up to a Q&A. If we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will answer them after the webinar individually. All right, so first question. I would like to address the issue when it comes to diet and nutrition, and that issue is confusion. We have more information out there than ever in history, yet more people are more confused than ever in history. We're not sure what we should eat, when we should eat. Should we fast? Should we not fast? Is it something that I should eat during this time of my cycle if I'm a woman who's cycling, or is it something that I should just completely cut out of my diet because I don't feel too good about it, or it gets me bloated? So it's really difficult to dial in our nutrition for ourselves. And frankly, it's analysis paralysis when we go into a grocery store. So the question is that I'm going to go around the circle, and we're going to start with Carly. Why do you think there is an immense amount of confusion out there? Where does it stem from?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to start off with, and I'm glad that you brought this up. I do think we're living in this age where we have a lot of information, but it's almost to a point where there's too much noise, right? When you have a lot of static, a lot of noise in this health and nutrition space, it's hard to pay attention to the actual signal that is going to move that needle for you. So I always like to say that we make about 200 food-related decisions every single day. Which is a lot, right? So food is quite literally always on our mind. But if you talk to anyone about it, right, you have your mom that's telling you that keto worked well for her, so you should try this. You have your friend on Facebook that says, no, vegan diet worked really well for me, and this is what you need to do to optimize your health. And all the while, we have this science that's coming in and saying, nope, this food is now bad, right? Don't touch this food. And then the next day, some other headline comes out that's really flashy and it catches your attention that goes against everything each one of those voices told you. So I think there's a lot of these headlines, there's a lot of this noise, and it's hard to pay attention to the one that really matters. And I always think that's the one that's inside your body. We've become so disconnected with our own bodies that we're listening to these external voices and we're not listening to what our bodies are telling us, right? We have this hunger sensation and we avoid it at all costs because that's a sign of weakness. Our bodies are telling us they don't like a food, but oh, well, this website told me this is a food that I need to eat to lose weight. So we're ignoring every single thing that our bodies are telling us with regard to our diet, our nutrition, and all of those choices that we're making every single day. So what starts to happen is we're mistrusting the information that's coming in, we're mistrusting our own bodies, and then we get further and further disengaged from the metrics that really matter. So if you look at anyone that's making a health choice, the metric they're usually monitoring is weight, right? That one number on the scale. And as Sean and Ashley can probably attest to as well, that doesn't always move quickly. It's the slowest metric to change. And I think when we're only focusing on that, we're going to get discouraged, right? We're putting all this effort in only to see that needle move 1 point, 1 pound lost, or oh, maybe we even gained a pound. So it's easy for us to get discouraged. We are this society that is really into instant gratification, and we need to see those results right away. So that's where I think, these wearable devices, these things that can, tell us in real time whether the choices that we are making are good for our body or not so good for our body, can really develop that awareness and that reconnection with our body and make that sticky change that ultimately turns into a habit.
That is an excellent point. Yeah. Ashley, I would love to jump to you. What have you seen with the clients and patients that you've worked with? Were there any common questions that come up or common frustrations? And how were you able to untangle their path for them?
Well, first of all, Carly, well said, bravo. And I'll say, like, I can echo that. Like in my experience with my patients, I would have, I worked with in oncology, I had cancer patients. And so they would come in having, just read some book or read some movie, and they're like trying super hard to stick to this diet. Like, and oftentimes it would be like a vegan diet or a raw diet. And they're like feeling so bad, but they're so strictly believe that that's the one for them because they read it in a book. And even for myself, when I first started in oncology, I strictly believed that everyone needed to be on a vegan diet, everyone needed to do this. But what the reality is everybody's got something different that they have to do. And again, we're in this society where there's a lot of inputs, and people would just be so disconnected from their body and the feedback that they were getting, that they just weren't willing to listen to it. Because, you look at people walking around, like how often when you're walking down the street, do you actually see somebody with their head up? You always see people with their head down, and they're constantly downloading information from a screen. Same thing happened with my patients. They're constantly downloading, because they're desperate, information from every place but themselves. And so one of the things that we would do is just have them start to tap back into, use other metrics to figure out what was going on with their body and their nutrition, and then kind of work from the inside out as opposed to the outside in.
Makes excellent sense. Yeah, and I highly, very much agree with you that intuition and then coupling that with the right data points is something that we really all need to start implementing into our lives. Well, Sean, I'd like to hear a little bit about your own story when it comes to confusion. I mean, you've overcome various health conditions and really are thriving in your skin right now. How did the journey occur? When did you realize that I need to take things into my own hands and I really need to figure it out for myself?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there's a lot of us that are wounded healers. I think in particular, it's a story that makes sense. It's the hero's journey. And then at some point we choose to become the mentor. It's a story that's well known. It gets used in Hollywood, like Obi-Wan Kenobi to Luke Skywalker, Mr. Miyagi to the Karate Kid, Mickey with Rocky. And then like in the newer movies, Rocky becomes the mentor to Creed, Luke becomes the mentor to Ray, Daniel becomes the mentor to the kids in the Cobra Kai. It's like, it's the hero's journey. And for me, I grew up with a very difficult childhood, and I had a lot of depression that led into obesity, disordered eating. At times I was binging, and then at times I was anorexic. I went from 300 pounds to 150 pounds. I'm 6'2", 6'3". And at no point did I love myself. At one point I was orthorexic. I was 220 pounds, jacked and ripped and working out 4 hours a day. At all these points, I was miserable. I was doing all the things. I learned how to manipulate my diet without a doubt. I learned how to take all the supplements. I learned how to biohack. Like up until 3 years ago, and I've been giving advice for 20 years and formulating all this. Up until 3 years ago, all this biohacking that I was doing was just keeping me alive with this ultra masculine, like 80 to 100 hours a week of external validation seeking, because I didn't love myself, of fear of missing out, of incredible amounts of travel. Yes, I was on stage, on TV, had a book, all these things, but I, again, really didn't love myself. And despite all the accomplishments, it was never enough. If I got on Ben Greenfield, like I needed to be on Joe Rogan, or what, and it's like, it was just never good enough. There was always the next place, the next bar. And that type of suffering and self-loathing, and voice that was going inside my head was a brutal one. Like no one was tougher on me than me. And I didn't feel like I deserved better.
Yeah.
And so it took a long time for me to work my way through this. I knew all the tools, all the techniques, all the, hacks, all the ways of working out, all the supplements, all the diets. I could manipulate everything, but at no point did I love myself. And so at the core.
Oh no. Wi-Fi in Nusara. What's going on? All right. So we lost Sean for a second. I'm sure he'll be back. But in the meantime, I would like to start a poll before we go into our next question. So I would love to know, what do you find is the most difficult for you in dialing in your diet? Is it too much misinformation? Is it too many low quality options? Is it unhealthy food tastes too delicious, which is unfortunately true, or you just don't know what works for you? So while you all sort of chime in and see which one fits for whom, I will kind of gear up the next question, and I really hope Sean will be able to tune back in. But in the meantime, so we've established that all the information that's out there doesn't matter unless you figure out what works for you. And Sean is back, I think, because it just pinged.
I think we got him back.
Okay. All right. So there you are. Lost you for a second. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry about that. Zoom crashed for some reason.
That's okay. I'll let you finish.
So yeah, just rounding this out is I think at the core of like all of this, going back to the points that Carly and Ashley were making around bio-individuality and this being about lifestyle and not like crash diets or quick choices or someone else dictating to you that they can fix you, save you, heal you, that actually removes your sovereignty. And you want to be the one that's in control. You shouldn't be the victim. If you love yourself, stand up for yourself, change the dialogue inside your head. If anyone talked to you like you talk to you, you wouldn't be their friend. So change that dialogue inside your head. And instead of the victim, it's time to be the victor. And you can be the champion. You can have the inner champion instead of that inner victim, that mean voice inside your head. You can change that dialogue. And that's something to work on. That's a muscle that you can flex in time. And you'll find that like there's fine tuning to do with the diet. But when you love yourself, a lot of these great choices just start falling into place. Like I can tell you technical stuff about, keto and fasting and autophagy and, metabolic flexibility and whatever. But by and large, you know how to move your body and eat pretty well. Most people do. And those things will just start happening when you're loving yourself, when you're caring for yourself. 100%. And that's a big shift.
100%. And mental health is such a huge element of our physiology. And in the next round of questions, I would love to come back to you and how food often relates to mental health and how the connections with biochemistry and neurochemistry occur there. So with that said, we talked about understanding health and nutrition and diet for ourselves is really a journey we have to embark on our own. We need to take this into our hand, and really has to be a N=1 approach, because there's no one size fits all. It's a broken record, but it's true. So when it comes to, I'm going to have individual questions for each of you. And I know, Sean, you have talked about in your social media about food cannot be medicine. It is medicine if it's done the right way. So my first question is going to go to Ashley, and I would love to pick your brain on a little bit how food relates to serious health conditions. Like, is it something that triggers any sort of health conditions, or what do you see can it be I wouldn't say cure, but can it be a source of a solution for any health condition? What have you seen with your patients?
Oh gosh, I've seen a lot. This is a topic I could talk on for probably 3 days. So I'm going to try to condense it down to like a minute or so, but I get
absolutely. 3 minutes. How's that? Just kidding.
So I'll say, I've worked in oncology, and oddly enough, maybe this is a good thing, maybe a bad, my specialty kind of ended up being like stage 4+ cancer patients. And I've also worked with, chronic infectious disease patients that have been sick for 20+ years. So literally I met people where I am their last straw. And I shouldn't say I, because it's not me, I had a whole team. And what's crazy is I've had patients that have literally tried every single treatment, like cancer treatment conventionally. And of course, I should give the disclaimer, like, this is not a recommendation. I'm not recommending people do this, all that. But literally, the only thing that they changed was their diet. For some people, we did therapeutic fasting. For some people, we did juicing. For some people, we did keto. And that was the only variable change. And all of a sudden, their cancer started shrinking. Some of them are still in remission to this day. I mean, I can remember I had this 21-year-old patient who came to me and had no money for treatment. And all he did was a little bit of natural therapy, which was in this case, high dose vitamin C therapy, because that was all he could afford. And he did fasting. He's still alive. And it's been, I think, 8 years now. And he was given like a week to live. And I've seen this time and time again. So again, not something I can say works for everybody, because it's truly something that unfortunately doesn't. Cancer is very complex. But on the other side of that, kind of in lines with what Sean was saying, I've also seen patients that have come to me where everything is super dialed with their diet. Like their nutrition is on point. They do the yoga, they exercise, but you know what? In between their ears, they don't love themselves, or they're not living in alignment. And I hate to say it, but like when I would first sit down with the patient, I would ask them, like, you know, why do you want to live? What are you living for? What's your purpose? And if they didn't have a clear alignment there, I kind of knew how things were going to go for them. And like, unless they put a lot of work into that. So the answer is, long answer short, is it plays a role in everything, in every disease I've ever worked with. I've seen a role for nutrition, because it does impact your brain, right? Your gut, 90% of your neurotransmitters are produced in your gut. So even then it makes a difference. But when it comes to cancer, like I've literally seen cancer be turned on and off by dietary manipulation and therapeutic diets. So it's crazy. Same thing with patients that have had chronic infection, changing around their diet, especially limiting sugars and carbohydrates, and being really, really targeted with that has been extremely impactful. So it's huge. Like this is something that I could talk on forever. I believe this is why I do what I do, and I never will get tired of it, because I see how much it matters. Yeah.
That's incredible. Yeah, gosh, your stories give me goosebumps. Yeah, it's insane. So you mentioned mental health, and what happens between our ears is extremely important, essential. So Sean, how do you see, let's dive into a little bit of the science here. What happens with the food we eat and our brain and our head and our mental health? How the two are linked?
Yeah, I mean, that was a great lead in on the essence of how we're eating, as Ashley said, that you know, it makes a difference, the way that we have intention behind this. I think that's a very powerful one. One of the biggest things that I've seen, and this is working in plant medicine quite a bit, is that, for example, if you're in a sympathetic nervous system state chronically, that you need to be overpowered essentially by plant medicine, and the doses need to be much higher, and it may not be as efficacious. When you're in more of a parasympathetic nervous system state, meaning, you know, rested, relaxed, rest and digest kind of thing, cortisol is lower. You know, you're in a state where you're able to receive, absorb, assimilate, digest, and utilize these nutrients. That's a huge thing. And you're avoiding states of like inflammation, glycation, oxidation. You're running into states that are known as like insufficient cellular energy states, because you're using so much mitochondrial energy, so much ATP in your brain when you stay in loops, when you're overwhelmed emotionally. Like the more relaxed that you can get, the more that you can use the food that you're taking in, the more that you can avoid it being stored as fat, because you're in this fight or flight state and it wants to store energy. And also, you know, all of these mitochondrial metabolic dysfunction states are leading to inflammation, glycation, oxidation, states of damage, like where you're aging more biologically, and you're putting yourself in a greater propensity for disease states. Almost all diseases are metabolically related. So if I'm answering that correctly, and then to go beyond that, as it was mentioned before with the neurotransmitters in the gut, that the majority are there. So having great gut health, not having a leaky gut, not having too much zonulin, having the proper microbiota, the bacteria on your body, this microbiome, there's a term called holobiomes that it's actually like a symbiosis that's taking place between us and the bacteria. The bacteria actually outnumber our cells. So it gets really complex that we're like this multifaceted organism that's a lot deeper than the way we used to think about it. And to have the majority of these neurotransmitters in the gut and think about the gut-brain axis, it's unique. But I would say one of the biggest factors for all of this is being in this parasympathetic state so that we can be in a proper state of healing, of autophagy, where we're not trapped in like these mental loops. They show people that have neurodegenerative disorders, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, depression, like they all have like a lack of neuroplasticity. They have low levels of BDNF. And so they just stay in loops. And in those loops, they're just expending lots of energy and they're feeling overwhelmed. And it's just, they stay in these loops all day long. And it's keeping inflammation up, cortisol up, epinephrine, all of this stuff up. And then you're rarely in a state of healing. You're rarely in a state of positive immunity, of nutrient utilization, of having, and you tend to burn through these neurotransmitters in those states. Like they have depleted levels of acetylcholine, serotonin, dopamine, and then you can fall into addictions trying to replace them. And that happens a lot with eating disorders like I had. Like when you're low in all these neurotransmitters, it feels good to it's not about getting high. It's about coming up off the floor. When you just feel nothing, it feels great to feel something. So I know that was kind of a convoluted answer, but
I asked for science. You brought science. I love it. It was absolutely a fantastic answer. And 100% I agree that in order for us to be able to digest the food that we eat, we need to be in that parasympathetic state. And that's why it's often told when you're having lunch or dinner or just eating a meal, don't be on your phone. Don't watch the news during that time, because your body gets into this fight or flight sympathetic state. And at that state, your body is not prioritizing digestion. It's prioritizing for you to start fighting or fleeing.
I had two states for the majority of my life. I had vigilant and ultra vigilant. I had sympathetic and ultra sympathetic. I was rarely, if ever, relaxed, able to sleep, feeling like I was safe. And I think that's the case with a lot of people, that it's overlooked. That healing, self-care, getting into feminine energy, getting into, parasympathetic states, whatever you want to call it, breath work, meditation, yoga, ecstatic dance, all the things you're journaling. I was addicted to biohacking because I was trying to push, do more masculine, 80, can I get to 100, 120 hours, can I get on these stages? Can I do more? And it's crazy. And I was never in a parasympathetic state. So it's often overlooked, and I think it's really important.
That's 100% true. So Carly, I'd like to turn to you as the nutrition manager at NutriSense, dealing with continuous glucose monitoring. How does food impact our blood sugar, and how is it one of the most important things that we really want to measure? And finally, we can do it without having to pluck our finger every meal.
Yes, great question. That was wonderful, Ashley, Sean. Love both of the points that you made. But yeah, so when we're looking at assessing for these metabolic health metrics, I truly think that continuous glucose monitoring, exactly what it sounds, you're monitoring your glucose continuously all day long for 14 days. I think of that as the lowest hanging fruit to kind of quantify that data and point you in the right direction of where you might need to make an adjustment to reach whatever health goal that you have. So before I go into like why that's important, what we're looking for, I think it's important to touch on what's supposed to happen when we eat, what we're supposed to see in our blood sugar when we eat. A lot of times when people start measuring blood sugar continuously, we think that it needs to be a flat line all the time. We see these keto folks that just want it flat line, zero variability all the time. Really, that's not what we absolutely need, right? Our body is supposed to have small fluctuations in glucose all day long. So what we want to see is kind of that beautiful shape of that glucose curve. And we can make a lot of insights from what that glucose curve looks like. So what we want to see, what we're supposed to see, right? We eat a healthy meal, maybe we eat a mixed macronutrient meal, and we see glucose start to increase. But we want to see a peak below a certain line because that tells us that our body's maintaining that really tightly controlled glucose homeostatic range. And so when glucose starts to rise above that, right, we're seeing big peaks, we're seeing drops really, really low. That's a sign that something might be going on that's impacting our ability to keep glucose in that homeostatic range. And it's a lot easier to proactively manage these things versus reactively trying to solve the problem. So when we see those big peaks, we can have this, I always think of it as a little yellow flag raising up and saying, hey, pay attention to me. This is somewhere we need to maybe make an adjustment. So aside from that, we're also looking for small shifts in glucose. So a lot of times when you hear people talk about riding the glucose roller coaster, that's what they mean. They're having huge shifts in glucose. And our body responds by pumping out insulin to bring glucose back down really quickly. And that can often cause these big drops in glucose. So these shifts, either really high, really low, just dramatic changes, can lead to anxiety, mental health issues, just feeling like hangry or out of touch with our body all day, feeling on edge, low energy. I know when I have large glucose shifts, I can almost know that I'm going to want to take a nap after I eat. So those are things that you might see improvements in right off the bat from monitoring that. And then lastly, we want to look for a quick return to baseline. And that's going to tell us that our insulin's working properly, that meal worked well for us. If it's taking a little bit too long, so more than about 2 to 3 hours after you eat to return to that pre-meal value, that might be a sign that we can adjust the timing of the meal, right? We know that insulin sensitivity is a lot better earlier in the day. So can we have that food earlier in the day and have a better response? Or maybe we have a little bit too much fat and carbs in the meal and that's causing a delayed glucose response. Can we adjust that? So again, it's not this judgmental thing. It's just kind of alerting us to where we need to make those little tweaks that can make us feel better throughout the day. And that's where I think there's a lot of power there. There's no other way that we can monitor this by glucose except for that continuous glucose monitor. So I really think it just packs the most punch. And I think it's really, really helpful. And then the other thing you had mentioned is, why is this important? I get this question all the time. I don't have diabetes. My labs are normal. Why do I care? And first of all, I'm here to tell you that glucose excursions beyond these thresholds are really common. Take me, for example, I'm a healthy person. I'm a dietitian. I feel like I eat really well. I exercise, I lift weights every day. I've had spikes above that threshold and I've been able to make changes just by monitoring my glucose. So there's a lot of research that shows that 93% of non-diabetic individuals are reaching those impaired glucose tolerance ranges at least sometime in their lifetime, at least sometime in their week. And of those folks, 10% of them are having impaired glucose tolerance levels. So those really high levels for 2 hours a day. And just think about that. When you have those high glucose responses, that's exposing your body, that's causing inflammation. It can cause oxidative damage. And as Sean mentioned, these are all the precursors for that ultimate metabolic dysfunction that we see later on. So it's not one single spike that's going to cause you to get there, but it's those repeated excursions over time. And really, if we're monitoring early, we're able to identify where we need to make those changes and where we can have the biggest impact. So last thing I'll touch on just really briefly is we've all touched on this, but there's a lot of biological individuality, right? You might respond really well to sweet potatoes. I might have a big spike. And I think we follow these blind graphs that say, this is a good food for you. This is a good carb. This is a bad carb, but it's really not that black and white. Good example. We are all told that brown rice is better for you than white rice, I'm here to tell you I respond better to white rice. So it's those small little things that you would never think of until you start to peel back and really question what you've been told, the narrative that has been coming at you, and you put yourself in that driver's seat and approach it with that curiosity to test and not guess, and make your decisions from there based on your own body.
I love that. That is such an excellent point. I mean, understanding my blood sugar has been one of the most important aspects of my life. And then comes, understanding my sleep, understanding my recovery and biometrics. So with the next question, round of questions, we're going to go into all these quantification metrics and all the relevant data points that we should pay attention to on a continuous basis and potentially monitor trends as we get on one diet. And just to understand, because one diet will only work for you until it doesn't, and really understand if fasting is for you, what time of how many hours should you fast for, or if you're a woman and perhaps you're cycling, then there are times when you should probably have a shorter fasting window, and other times when you can have a longer fasting window. So there are a lot of variables that we have questions about, but data can really point us to an objective solution and understanding of whether what we're doing is for the better or for the worse. And before I do that, it was really interesting from the previous poll, the majority of you answered that your sort of what is the most difficult thing for you when it comes to dialing in your diet? It's you don't know what works for you. And as much as I hate that this is something that we have, but I love that we are going to be able to hopefully at least point you to the right direction on how you can start to figure out what is it that works for you. So before we jump into the last question, I would like to launch the second poll, which is going to be about on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being bad, 10 being good and excellent, what would you say your relationship is with food? And it might come down to that. Are you loving yourself? Are you loving the food you're giving to your body? And where do you see food? And do you live to eat or do you eat to live? It's some of those questions that I personally have battled with across the past 10, 15 years. And I was a lot of times hangry, and it was one of those things where I didn't always know what I should be eating and why am I even eating this? Is it doing me any good, or am I just eating it because I'm supposed to? So with the last question of roundtable, I would like to ask and dive into quantification of your dietary choices. Let's start to make data-driven dietary decisions is what I would like to encourage you all to start doing. And with that, I'm going to start this question, addressing it to, I think, who's coming first? Oh, yeah, I'm going to go with Sean first for this one. What have you seen as far as that? He's like, oh, God, here it is. So what have you seen as far as tests or lab work or anything like that that really would help people begin to understand what dietary choices might work for them best, or how they can sort of experiment on their own and apply this N=1 individualized approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first chapter in my book of the energy formula is experiment, the E in energy. It's experiment, nutrition, exercise, routines, growth, and your tribe. Experiment is a great one. And in that chapter, I go very much into the idea of bioindividuality that we're discussing here. And I love getting metrics, as Carly is talking about, obviously with BioStrap or NutriSense. I mean, it makes sense to get that data so you can be empowered. I think what Carly was saying, okay, Carly said that, that's awesome. Like, I totally agree with that. Like, one of the things that could be boosting up blood sugar, even if you're metabolically healthy, like she's saying, like you could have stress, and things that could be hormetic stressors, like meaning stresses, positive stresses, like fasting or weightlifting or keto or red light or whatever it is, ice baths. Those can be great, but if your allostatic load, your stress bucket's already overflowing, then they're not great. Like if you had just gone through a divorce, lost your job, like you got COVID, like sometimes those things just aren't aligned. And you can tell with your HRV, you can tell with your glucose monitor. So that's where that data is empowering. As far as labs, one thing that I talked about in my book, I feel like 3 labs could radically change the face of medicine if we looked at them proactively. Probably a cost of about $100. If we looked at them twice a year, we could be out front of metabolic dysfunction and mitochondrial dysfunction, therefore biological aging and 99% of disease. If we were looking at hemoglobin A1C, and there's other markers, I'm just saying ones that are cheap and easy for blood sugar. And certainly if you're using a glucose monitor, that can be even better data. But you know, quick and easy is hemoglobin A1C, which typically only diabetics get. HSCRP, C-reactive protein, looking at inflammation, which normally only people that have had heart attacks get. And looking at something like oxidized LDL, which you can look, so I was talking about glycation, inflammation, oxidation. You're just looking at like metabolic damage. I would add to that, like if you can look at dyslipidemia, something like lipoprotein A is probably the best thing. Cholesterol is not a great marker across the board. It's just not that well correlated. I think we spend a lot of time and money on cholesterol that's very misguided. So lipoprotein A would be one, and then vitamin D I just think is massive on so many levels. So those would be the 5 I would look at. But if I was to look at 3, it would be those 3. And if I was to just look at 2, it would be CRP and hemoglobin A1C. And there's so much that you could get from that. This is a quick snapshot that we're just not looking at, and which frustrates me that we're not looking at these proactively. And you could see over time what's happening in someone, and then start doing a deeper dive into labs, start using things like BIOSTRAP, a CGM, you know, exploring different interventions, nutritionally, exercise, and you can be out in front of this. But normally we only look at these labs once somebody already has a disease state, which is sad. So this is Sean, and I'm done speaking for now.
Oh, and you're back in Clubhouse. Oh yeah, that's excellent point. Yes, I 100% agree with you on those lab tests. And you talked about A1C, which is a blood sugar related marker. So going to blood sugar, I would like to talk to you, Carly, a little bit about.
Just one quick thought about blood sugar too. I forgot to mention this.
Yeah.
We didn't mention is a lack of quality sleep can put you in a state of acute insulin resistance. And it's one of the reasons for brain fog, because you're not getting enough cellular energy to your neurons. And if you chronically undersleep, then you become chronically insulin resistant, meaning you have about 5 times the rate of type 2 diabetes, 3 times the rate of heart attacks. You're on your path to metabolic dysfunction by just not getting enough sleep. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yes, I'm so glad you did, because that is, I remember you've talked about this in the a few months ago when we had a chat, and that statement about not sleeping enough and putting yourself into an insulin resistant state, that's something that a lot of people don't know. And that's why I personally find it very important to monitor sleep as well, and really start to understand how my sleep efficiency is over time, especially how my nutrition and dietary choices impact my sleep. So we'll have Ashley chime in on that one. And in the meantime, we only have a little bit time left to go to Carly and Ashley for this last question. But if you're watching this and you have questions, please throw them in the chat or the Q&A box. And if you're not sure about any dietary choices that you've been making, this is the time to ask, because you can get access to these brilliant panelists that you might not in your free time. So take any questions that you have into the box on the right, and we'll address them after we're done with the roundtable. So Carly, tell me a little bit about how we can make sense of that blood sugar data. I mean, we had Ali ask about, if something spikes my blood sugar, should I just stop eating it altogether? Or is it something that I should eat in a particular order of micronutrients? So tell me a little bit about how I can make sense of all the spikes and dips.
Right. And I think that was a great point. So Allie, thank you so much for asking that. I think it can be really easy to, when you first put on a CGM, right? You want to see good data. You want to keep your glucose curves in the optimal range. But I really think it's important to let go of that and look at the data with curiosity and not judgment. So the thing that I tell people all the time is you have to see your baseline before you make any changes. I get a lot of people that are like gung-ho on optimization and they want to do these experiments right when they slap on that sensor. But really, you're not going to make the most out of that until you understand what your baseline patterns are doing to your glucose. So I always say take the first few weeks to assess your baseline and note everything, right? I think it can be really cumbersome to log everything, but for those first 2 weeks and when you're experimenting, log every single thing. I always say there are 4 main pillars of glucose control. So we talked about food. We know that those spikes from food we can kind of play with. And Claudia, you had mentioned, trying different orders of eating. So that's a really cool thing we can play with. If you spike to sweet potatoes, like we talked about, or brown rice, then let's see what happens if we eat the salad and then protein and then your sweet potatoes last. That order can make a big difference. Just like Sean was saying, if you had a poor night of sleep the night before, that can result in up to like a 40% reduction in your insulin sensitivity. So what that means is you might tolerate that food just fine, but if you had a poor night of sleep, maybe you have a smaller portion, or maybe you add a little bit of movement to enhance that insulin sensitivity to that meal. So, we always say there's no good foods or bad foods. I'm here to tell you, like, I don't really think soda is a good food, but I think most whole foods, we can find a way to play with those and make them work in your diet. So I think first step is letting go of the constant want to be optimized and just to make those big changes, and just take everything for what it is and make notes of the things that are causing your bigger fluctuations in glucose. Then once you kind of know some things to play with, we can really come at it with that scientific N=1 approach and just look at it with curiosity. What happens if I move my fasting window a little bit earlier? What happens if I do a strength training workout before that high carb meal to help build some more glucose storage space for that incoming glucose? And so by changing those small little things, we can see sustainable swaps, tweaks that you can do in your diet that are going to promote better glycemic control. And that's ultimately, as we know, going to help us prevent disease, but also make you feel really, really good, stabilized, energized throughout the day. And I think when you see that in real time, that's the thing that's going to stick with you. And that's the thing that's going to remind you time and time again to keep those habits up. So there's a lot of things we can do. And I think the other thing is to always have someone that practices that N=1, no one size fits all diet in your pocket. There's a lot of practitioners that might think that one way is the way to do it, but you really want to, come to people like Ashley, like Sean, that really know that it's a lot more nuanced than that. At NutriSense, everyone gets paired with their own personal dietitian, and that's literally someone in their pocket that you can text and be like, hey, why did my blood sugar spike? Like, what can I do? And they will look at that data and help you find ways based on your diet to kind of optimize that. So not a prescriptive approach, but more of just that, like, we're in it together type thing. So
yes, I'm so happy that you put that at the end, because that was going to be my follow-up question. How it's hard to make sense of it on our own. Is it whatever's happening? I'm not always sure. Is it supposed to happen, or how do I sort of address that spike, and what can I do? So it's nice that you have the option to talk to somebody who knows all about it. So moving on to Ashley, you've done a lot of work with biometrics and sleep parameters. What have you seen? How does diet and nutrition impact biometrics? And how can I monitor if my dietary choices are impacting me in a positive or negative way?
Great question again. And kind of to like Carly's point, like I'm a huge fan of continuous glucose monitoring when it comes to like that immediate feedback. But I mean, my business is actually based on, wearables and biometrics. So we have large populations wearing wearable devices. And so then we educate them on how to make health decisions surrounding that. And one of the biggest things with diet is like, we can see, so somebody tries on a new diet, and I would say the term try on because like, it's, I don't like to use the term diet because it seems very short term. I'm more in like, we're going to try on a diet temporarily to find out if it's a sustainable lifestyle solution for that person. And one of the ways you can do that is by seeing how being on a diet for the course of several weeks or even a week or a couple of days impacts their heart rate variability. What is their resting heart rate like? How is their sleep improving or not improving? And so that's why, like with BioStrap, we have all these different metrics that I can say, okay, so I recommended that this person get on a diet for a certain style of eating for a certain amount of time. And what is that doing to their metrics? Are they improving? Are they not? And that's something without having, if you don't have access to a continuous glucose monitor, you have access to a wearable, you can see that. And if it's not working, then you can tweak those things. And that's one thing that I've seen to be extremely beneficial, especially for those type A people, or even people who need a little bit more intrinsic motivation, to have that positive feedback and see that coming back as data that's either positive or negative. You can manipulate based on that. Very similar to like Carly was saying, but on a much different scale. And then again, touching on what Sean said, sleep is essential to everything. Sleep and where your mind is. And so I have clients that, they can tell me, I know what their baseline looks like when they're eating their diet, their nutrition is good, but all of a sudden that shifts. That's almost a cue to me that there's something more going on. And usually it has something to do with stress. So like I have all these clients that they say, oh no, I'm not stressed at all. I'm not stressed at all. Everything's fine. And I see their heart rate variability is like in the tank. And I'm like, well, you're still sleeping pretty well. Like what's going on? And then it comes out that they've got some huge stress factor. And so it's great because it allows you to kind of do some deductive reasoning. It's not, A plus B equals C, but it really gives us some good insight. And that's why, again, working with a practitioner who is tuned into this kind of feedback and this sort of data is invaluable to people. So it's a matter of educating yourself, but also having that third party there to keep you accountable and make sure that you're seeing the information in the correct way.
This is fantastic. And I love that you mentioned HRV, and personally, I also monitor resting heart rate and whether it's deviating away from my baseline, and how it occurs nocturnally. So totally going to do a shameless plug here, but with BioStrap, we do have a nutrition program, which was developed by Ashley. And we have, 6 different protocols, whether you're keto, vegan, dorm diet, if you only have access to very limited resources, and metabolic reset. So there are various programs for you to test and start to see how those impact your physiology. And these are all data-driven created plans, and you've got the recipes, you've got ingredients that are top notch. If you're sensitive to something, there are easy swaps. So thank you, Ashley, for putting all that together. And every month it's based on your caloric expenditure and resting calorie and metabolic resting. Mixing up the words here. Basal metabolic rate.
Basal metabolic rate.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. So it is a very individualized approach. So it is a way for you to jumpstart your nutrition journey on your own and really start to monitor how these various choices impact your HRV, your deep sleep, your sleep latency. Are you waking up more than once at night, or are you able to sleep through the night sounding really well? Like sometimes I do. So that's it. You guys rocked the floor. So we have various things we can monitor our nutrition and lifestyle with. We have continuous glucose monitoring, which is, by the way, for those of you who are not familiar with it, it's a device that you put on the back of your upper arm and it stays there for 2 weeks at a time. And you just scan it by sliding your phone by it and it will tell you what your blood sugar is. Pretty neat tool. Quite love it. And then we have the BioStrap, which is a wrist-worn wearable, and it measures your sleep efficiency and nocturnal biometrics with clinical reliability. So this is definitely something where if you want to start to quantify how your dietary choices impact your daily life and every night of sleep, then highly recommend starting with these 2 devices. And if you don't have one, or maybe don't want to invest in one, go to our Instagram, because we have partnered with NutriSense and we're doing a giveaway right now up until Sunday. So go ahead and enter, because you might just get all these devices for free. All right, so just going to jump into a few questions that came in while we were chatting. So we had Robert asking earlier, he's saying, I had a pituitary apoplexy and the result is a highly dysfunctional ACTH response. And he's curious if we've got an answer for him. Can we advise him with something? Any thoughts on this? I'm not sure what ACTH is, if I'm being completely honest. Anybody has worked with anything like this, pituitary apoplexy?
Yeah, that's adrenal, but
Yeah.
involves a bleed, a hemorrhage. So, I mean, that's something that's very specific and medical in nature. And I don't think that we would be advised to really
It's a tough one
respond
to
to that.
answer. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, then, Robert, I recommend you to, go to your doctor and dig a little bit deeper with a healthcare professional.
I will say with a pituitary, like keeping dopamine levels high, like because I had a pituitary tumor, like having a dopamine agonist is like what they recommend, something like cabergoline. But finding ways to increase your own dopamine, through exercise, through things that make you happy and connected and focused and lit up. Those things are all ideal to keep that pituitary in line.
Okay, thank you. All right, up to next one. Heather has a question that I'm just going to read out loud and see if one of you can drop an answer to it. What is some nutritional or supplemental inputs of recommendation to help with my allostatic load of my regimen of high intensity interval training, strength training, hot Pilates, bear, and body yoga? Is that hot yoga? Throughout of my week. I'm keto and female 38. I monitor my sleep with my Garmin watch. Used to get 8 hours nightly, and now I'm getting between 5 and 6 suddenly. I try to nap to make up for the loss of sleep now, but really want to return to at least my 7-8 hours of good sleep nightly. How would you guys advise?
Minerals.
Okay.
All the minerals. And I should say, I don't know you. I can't give you all those disclaimers that I have to give you. But the biggest thing when you're doing a lot of those activities like high intensity interval training, you're yogaing, you're sweating a lot, you are just cranking out minerals. And like one of the most common issues I see with my athletic clients is that they tend to not replenish those minerals and hydrate enough at the same time. And then the other caveat is sometimes people are a little bit amino acid deficient. So, just ruling that out. But something that you could very easily do is try adding in like a really high quality electrolyte supplement. Like my personal favorite is LMNT, like Rob Wolf put together that one. I'm sure Sean has recommendations on that, but it's higher in sodium, it's got potassium and magnesium, and it doesn't have sugar in it. So it will help you to stay on your keto diet. But I've seen personally amazing results with it. And like all my athletes just knock it out of the park when they get back on some proper minerals. And even if it's just through food, you can do that as well. And that's my 2 cents.
She did say she is doing the Element electrolytes and Dr. Berg's trace minerals and Kion aminos.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you might just need more.
Sorry,
go ahead, Sean. Sorry.
Just super quick, just maximizing the sleep quality. So again, focusing on parasympathetic in the evening, find ways to wind down. Don't be watching TV that, not only is TV a blue light, but it can be like alarming, it can be excitatory, it can be sex and violence and all these things. It can be the news. Just avoiding that device time in the evening. Getting more red light than blue light, wearing potentially blue light blockers, having plants in your room, making sure that the bedroom is a place for relaxation and is anchored that way. Like you don't have arguments in there, you don't have your computer in there, you don't have work in there. It's just for sleep and potentially sex. And not eating too late, keeping in line with your circadian rhythm, trying to eat during the daylight window. Potentially taping your mouth might help, especially if you border on apnea. Those are some things that could all help as well. Like look at just sleep quality and not just quantity.
Great point.
Yeah, great point. Great points. And the only thing that I would add on top of that is I'd be curious when you're timing your carbohydrates. Like if you do carbohydrates, sometimes cyclical carbohydrate eating around your cycle for women can be really, really helpful, especially on keto, just to kind of reduce some of that allostatic stress. So I'd be curious to see if we could play around with the timing or if it's a cyclical approach, if that would help with sleep. I've seen that help a lot.
Avoiding alcohol and caffeine in the evening as well.
Right.
Yep. She said that she just went back to school and spending a lot more time on her laptop than usual. And so perhaps blue block glasses. There you go.
Got him.
Yeah, there's also apps on the computer that can like, what's it called?
Iris.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Sure.
I
There's
think
a
that's the
couple of
one
them,
I've
though.
heard of. Yeah.
Virus
Um,
is pretty cheap too.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So we had Sadine ask a question, and I know I saw Carly, you answered it, but some people might also have the same question in their head. What is the preferred parameter for the glucose fluctuations? So would one say less than 20 milligram per DL change is best?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really great question. And my first caveat would be to say that everyone's really individual. So some people feel these fluctuations a little bit more harshly. And so it really is worth experimenting to see where you feel your best, especially if you have any issues with energy fluctuations or fatigue after meals. You can really start to pay attention to those delta values and see where you feel best. At NutriSense, we have meal scores. So if you log a meal and you're monitoring your glucose, we take into account your peak, your exposure, your area under the curve, and then your stability, which is that total shift in glucose. And a 10 out of 10 perfect score would be less than 30 milligrams per deciliter. So we consider that a pretty moderate shift in glucose. You'll probably find different recommendations depending on the company that you're looking at. But again, all really, really individual. But I'd say less than 30 is a really good place to start.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Sadine, for asking. And thanks, Carly,
Thank
for
you.
a rocket answer. All right. So
Sure.
we've got Ian asked earlier, have any of you evaluated kinesiology as an instantaneous monitoring tool? Anybody has done anything with kinesiology, movement?
I mean, it definitely is. Like, I'm trying to think of the way that they're like, I've had trainers that very much focus on this. Like your kinetic chain is very much telling you, like, just even with like how you leverage your big toe can go all the way up your spine, like, and how you have ankle mobility, like, can affect your cervical spine, can affect the way you move through space. So like you can have a rotated and flexed hip, you know, and you can have different leg lengths based on your ankle mobility or your big toe flexibility. Like, it's obviously, yeah, it's kinesiology is great. Understanding all that is great. I'm not sure exactly what the question is asking, but definitely same as all these other metrics, like working with someone who's really good at kinesiology, if you have a trainer like that, and then adapting your training around mitigating some of those issues that you might be having so that you can move properly, that's going to open up everything and certainly affect your health for sure.
All right. I think we got all the questions answered that we had time for right now. So if you have any questions, you can always email Claudia@biostrap.com and I will be able to get you some of the answers that you might want to dive into. But for now, I really appreciate all three of you for joining in and really taking your time and energy to share your expertise and experience and knowledge with so many of our attendees. And we're sure going to be repurposing this recording in the future. And hopefully I'll get to see a few of you or all of you at some point in person. And yeah, and to find out more about every single one of the panelists, Carly, how can people find out more about you or connect with you if they, would like to get some more advice? And her
mic was off, but yeah, if you want to learn more about NutriSense and all we have to offer, you can find us at nutrisense.io. We're also on social at nutrisense.io. For me personally, probably best way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I try and separate that a little bit more, but LinkedIn, Carly Hayes, come find me and keep this conversation going.
Thank you so much. And Ashley, how can people find more about you? And you have a retreat coming up too, and 2 a year. So share.
I'm pretty excited. We do two retreats a year. I'm based out of Aspen, Colorado. So shameless plug. If you want to come elevate and really get in touch with that sympathetic side, come to Aspen. We've got it the April 29th through May 2nd. But if you guys are interested in more information, I have my personal, which is kind of like my professional as well. It's shlee.marie on Instagram, or there's Grimmell Biometrics, which is my business. And I'm a pretty open book. So I kind of just like to share what I do because I really do practice what I preach. So enjoy, reach out to me. I also love what I do. So love questions of any flavor. And as long as I can answer them safely and effectively, I will.
Thank you. Perfect. And Sean, how can we find out more about you? I know that some of you who people might not know, you have an excellent book, which I've read, and lots of fantastic resources are in there, especially about if people are interested more into supplementation. So how can people find out more about you?
Energyformula.com is all about the book. There's an Audible, softcover, hardcover, and an ebook, and a bunch of extras if you go there. Sean Wells, SHAWN.com. I have like a free newsletter, a lot of information there, no charge for anything. There's no links or gimmicks or affiliate stuff. It's pretty straightforward. And then at Sean Wells on Instagram, and you can DM me any questions you have. So
Excellent.
thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. If you're curious about BioStrap stuff, you know, you can always go to biostrap.com. And if you have any questions, reach out to us through our website and sign up for our newsletter, because we're going to be sharing information about our upcoming webinars and all the latest and greatest in the world of digital health. So thank you so much. And everybody.
Thanks, Claudia.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You're a rock star too. We love you.
Yeah, great questions. Great panelists, great
absolutely.
questions. Thank you.
It was
Thank you.
really, I'm really happy with how this came out. So thank you so much, everybody. And I will see you very soon. Signing off.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.